In metaphysics, my philosophy, objectivism, holds that there is only one reality, not two, nor four, nor 10.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Reality. My name is William, and I'm here with Lev.
Hi, everyone.
And today we're going to be discussing a political theory put forth by Bret Weinstein on the Joe Rogan podcast recently. Bret Weinstein is a biologist. He used to work at Evergreen State College. And he's famous for being embroiled in a controversy at that college and getting basically run out of the place, and then becoming part of the intellectual dark web with celebrities like Jordan Peterson. And he recently appeared on the Joe Rogan show and introduced a political idea he had called the Dark Horse Duo Plan. This is a plan to basically recruit or draft two people to run as president and VP to counter the terrible choices we have this coming election in Trump and Biden. His idea involves picking one person from the center left and one person from the center right and having them team up. And basically one will act as the president and one will act as the vice president, but they will be a team in all major decisions. Unless there are emergencies, then the president will take charge. And he listed three basic qualifications for picking these people. The three qualifications are: they must be patriotic, they must be courageous, and they have to be highly capable. His two choices, the one from the center right, was Admiral William McRaven, who is a former SEAL and chancellor of the University of Texas. And his pick on the center left, is Andrew Yang, who everyone knows ran for president this time around on the Democratic side. So, do you have any thoughts on that, Lev?
I would say that it's an interesting idea and worth thinking about how we could change our political system, and even creating a better or more worthwhile system to participate in. Weinstein is a biologist by profession, PhD, researcher, all that. And I would know, even though he's not necessarily trained in political science, any scientist should be a systematic thinker, and they are people who would understand systems, how things interact. So even if he isn't a politician or he hasn't studied political science specifically, the idea comes more from being analytical and looking at strictly what would make the most effective system. Any biologist would think in terms of theories, and they would think in terms of what is most effective and consistent and reality-based according to what they've observed and studied. So it's not strictly, a partisan viewpoint he has here, or that he offered. He's offering a different systematic way of thinking about offering elections or picking candidates in a way that is beneficial for the political system of selecting candidates and selecting our leaders. That's the one thing I would add, because it might seem like he's not worth listening to because he's a biologist.
Yeah, he's definitely working on some strategy here. And he actually brings that up. He thinks that he's thinking long term. After the first 4 years, he says the two candidates would switch. So the one that was president in the beginning would become the vice president in the second term. And then this way they could actually hold the offices for something like 16 years if everyone agreed with this plan and voted this way.
Mm-hmm. My initial thought about his plan is that it makes more psychological sense for the way people think. People aren't necessarily looking for the maximum amount of conflict and being as rigid in their beliefs as they can. It seems many people would want an authority they can feel comfortable with and they could go along with. Regardless of the implications that means for psychology, I don't think people are really trying to look for something partisan and sectarian. It's more about something that, if we're going to have disagreements, at least we know who's going to be doing it, and they're people who care about the country. Hence the requirement to be patriotic, not just be patriotic in just scream America all around, but patriotic in the sense of what ideals do we want to have, or how do we want the system to operate.
Yeah, from his use of patriotic, I understood him to mean someone who's focused on what's best for America, not necessarily someone who is pushing just some radical, extreme ideology like communism or Nazism or something like that. He's looking for someone who believes in the American system itself and is trying to figure out what's best for that system.
That makes sense to me. He's still thinking within terms of the system, though we should acknowledge that he's not even looking to create a new system, just using the system as we have it, but altering the way the incentives and feedback within the system works. So that if you have two candidates, you have different feedback than of, say, either an echo chamber of constantly working against partisans standing against you. It would be more focused on enacting specific procedural changes within U.S. society rather than strictly an ideological change to the system. And it could be more individual oriented by, if we're not always so focused on which partisan system we're trying to support. Because it's almost, if you have two parties that you vote for at once, you're almost acknowledging that there will be transitions within different political transitions. And you're almost assuming that to begin with. And that way you can just work on it right away rather than just, in 4 more years, I'm going to have to deal with 4 years of getting nothing I like done. Then another, after that, 4 years of what I like, then 4 years of what I don't like. And at least with the two candidates, you could have simultaneously working on all issues at once, rather than just a pendulum going back and forth.
He's definitely trying to come to some compromise between the two sides and reach an agreement in the middle, like kind of a happy medium. And he actually I think he used the phrase unite the center. He's trying to bring everyone in the middle of the political spectrum together to defeat the two extreme opposites and push them out, basically try to form some coalition of the center. And I think that might be a good enough idea in the short term to kind of keep us afloat. But before I get to any sort of criticism of the plan, I wanted to ask you what you thought about his potential candidates. So he wanted to draft Andrew Yang, and I know you were in favor of Andrew Yang.
Yes.
You liked him. Maybe you want to tell us some of the good points of Andrew Yang.
Well, as far as Andrew Yang, I like how we can both seem radical and centrist at the same time. Maybe not, maybe relatively centrist in terms of what changes he wants to attain within society. I mean, like better employment, better economy, standard stuff, but radical at the same time in the methods he would get to attain his relatively modest proposals, such as universal basic income. And well, what I want to say about universal basic income is not that I support government giving money to everybody, but more that insofar as the government has taken money from people unjustly throughout time, whether you're a libertarian or not, like, because you'll say that government has unjustly taken money, and also that there exists many existing welfare programs, and that simplifying those programs for a single check for everybody makes it so that you both can decide how you use your own money without expanding the bureaucratic government system. And in a way, we could think of as a centrist doesn't have to be that their procedures are pretty simple, but that ideologically they're not trying to reach too far, but their changes can make a fundamental shift in the way the system works and how we select people. And that can be something people can get behind, I think, as far as picking their candidates. And I do recall the other candidate was that admiral, I forget his name, but he was on the team that captured Osama bin Laden. And I think that reflects a concern of patriotism, but I'm unsure how we should judge that in terms of ability as a candidate or even as a center-right candidate.
What do you mean? Why is it a concern?
Well, I haven't heard too much of his actual knowledge about politics and what he desires to attain within politics, or if he even has much of a political desire.
Oh, it was pretty clear that Weinstein was trying to draft him into politics. I don't think this guy wants to be a politician. But if he did want to be a politician, even that wouldn't exclude him, in my view, because I tend to agree with something Weinstein said. He said we shouldn't really worry about what these candidates would do in the future, and like on every particular subject. His issue issue was he needs to be a highly capable planner and strategist and leader. And I think that, I mean, the guy's an admiral in the Navy.
True.
I think he's probably, and he was a chancellor of a university, so he's probably a pretty capable person. And of course we'd have to vet him, but I don't have a problem with him not being a politician beforehand, or like, I don't really care what he knows about anything, as long as he can pick the right people. That was another thing Weinstein said, is that we need someone who knows how to pick the right people to do the job.
My main concern about the dark horse candidate thing is that it's too much of a centrist position, or that it's recruiting centrist politicians, and centrism also often appears to be lowest common denominator as far as the changes you want to affect and bring about. Because if you're going centrist, you're kind of going in between everything without taking too hard of a stand. And I think it's concerning when I might even argue that centrism is the primary issue of U.S. politics, that it's a rush to the lowest common denominator. And that's what produces our partisan system with the Republican-Democrat dichotomy. That you're just trying to appeal to these general feelings and sensations in people. And then if you go all out centrist in this dark horse idea, it would seem like you're even going beyond just arguing, just almost like maybe a zombie like haze, because then everybody just agrees in a very general and basic way, and nothing much would change in the end.
Exactly. I mean, I agree. That's the main problem with the plan is in the short term, it might look okay because we've got some leaders in there who aren't crazy. But in the long term, what are your principles? What's the political philosophy? What are you trying to achieve? And I didn't hear much of that from Weinstein. He wasn't picking candidates based on a philosophy of a reason or science. He was picking people he just thought were in the center, and what is the center? I mean, the center is just another point along the terrible dichotomy of our political spectrum. I don't think we're going to solve much in the long term if we continue to pick people who fall within the Republican Democratic spectrum.
I think if we think in terms of a whole political system, having a left or Democrat Republican binary, a dichotomy like that, it doesn't stabilize the system. It only causes more disequilibrium. It makes me think of cybernetics within psychology, especially, because that's really in terms of how systems work together to attain a certain status of equilibrium. And I think the Democrat-Republican dichotomy and binary actually is a destabilizing force. And in terms of cybernetics, it would be taking the system away from equilibrium, causing more instability and more issues. When we have more issues, and eventually it will collapse. And when I think about stability, it'd be like, if you're hungry, then you eat, but then you feel full. That's what your system is doing to prevent you from going into a positive feedback loop and just overeating and then becoming obese. And if you do overeat, as we know you do, become obese, and that means the system is unable to control itself. And I would think if you get stuck in even if you remain within the Republican Democrat binary, we're still not escaping this feedback loop. We have a extreme partisanship and extreme tribalism within politics nowadays.
Yeah, not only will it be an aspect of the same system, but it might potentially cause further division in the system or further breakdown, because now you'll have this third party in power, and then the Republican Democrats will be attacking that third party, and they'd be attacked. The third party would be attacked from both sides, and then that third party will have to attack back in two directions, and you'd have this system that's just breaking apart. And I think the main fundamental problem here is what is at the base of this system. It's a morality of altruism and of all kinds of nasty philosophical principles that don't support a healthy nation.
Yeah, I would agree.
And what we need to do is find someone like a Bret Weinstein, a biologist, who is also a philosopher, who can tell us how to fix the system at some sort of like fundamental level, not at some superficial short-term level. Like, we don't need patches, we need to build a new foundation.
Mm-hmm. Right, that even falls more in line with cybernetics, even, because it's not just that there is a system and it does things, but the system exists for some purpose or end. Whether if it's a living organism, it would be to live, and if it's in a psychological system, it's to have that organism act in a way that attains its biological needs, for example. And if we don't look at the base of what the system is operating on as a premise, what its goal and objective is, we're not going to be able to change anything. If we just say, oh, I want fewer partisan conflicts, if you don't change anything about the aims of that system, those new candidates will only eventually, in time, grow towards what almost seems to be an equilibrium now, a constant conflict of a pendulum swinging back and forth at a rapid rate. So it ultimately wouldn't change anything, even if we can't predict if it might collapse or might not, without changing the underlying objective of the system. It's only going to eventually regress to the same point again.
After 16 years and they boot Admiral William McRaven and Andrew Yang out, then what will we have? I mean, and what's going to happen in the meantime? What are they going to get anything done? Is Congress going to work with them? Will their regulations or whatever they put in place, will they be overturned by the Supreme Court? I don't know how you solve such a major problem, with just putting two people into the White House.
Well, it makes me think of when the Romans had a triumvirate system towards the end of the empire, where they had 3 emperors at once, and it actually didn't serve to save anything, and it was just like a last-ditch effort, and it was going to collapse anyway. And you only ended up having 2 different partisan empires. You had the Byzantines and the Romans, and that's all it was. You didn't save the system, you just amputated part of it. That's all you end up doing. Probably politically speaking, that might be all that happens. You amputate the weekend, and there'll be an even greater split within politics, because people are so focused on the partisanship that it might end up much worse than we expect.
It's a terrible thing to contemplate.
Yeah.
And I like the way Bret Weinstein thinks. I mean, he's a very brilliant guy, and he's always coming up with some interesting ideas. Unfortunately, I don't think he's too much of an objectivist. He sounds very reasonable and scientific, and he clearly knows his stuff. But I don't think he's put it all together at the philosophical level. There's something there that he's still clinging to civilization. He's still trying to save it the way it's formed now. He thinks that we can save this sinking ship, and maybe we should just be preparing to pick up the pieces, and I don't really know what else we can do.
I'm not sure there isn't need to be so fatalist, but I would want to say different candidates is the solution, but I'm not convinced that candidates are really the thing that needs to be changed. I can understand wanting to change the political voting system, but it's also important to recognize that maybe non-politicians and non-political science people are the ones best fit to figure out something, what any kind of scientist. Not to say that science always determines how everything should be, but that scientists are the systematic thinkers, and they come up with systems, and there are even the people who shape and change the world, for better or for worse. We could think of Mao was basically a librarian, but he changed the entire world, the entire system of China. He changed everything, and he wasn't a political scientist specifically. He was just a thinker and an integrator of many different ideas. Whether or not you think he's a terrible person, which I do, he certainly was a systematic thinker. And I could think of other academics who do awfully well in politics. I mean, Che was a doctor by training, and he was a communist revolutionary. And he kind of succeeded. It's not like Cuba. Well, in some ways, it's a disaster, but it's a revolution that succeeded against the U.S. even. So it is worth thinking that systematic thinkers, scientists even, are able to come up with new ideas. The problem is that so many scientists almost seem biased to be liberal that they're not even thinking about it anymore. But there could be a select few people that could think about something new. How do you feel about even who could come up with solutions? Do you even think political scientists are the ones that will be able to?
Today's political scientists, I doubt it. I think the answer is going to come from either the objectivist world or the classical liberal world.
Mm-hmm.
I think the right is going to lose. It's just going to be taken in by religion.
Yes.
I don't see much desire on the right to break away from serious religion. So they're just going to be pressured to go that way. I mean, even Trump, he panders to the right, and it's obscene. But the problem with the left is, even though they're very intellectual and they like ideas, they're just succumbed by the wrong ideas. I don't know what it is. I don't know how to break them out of that Marxist world they inhabit. It's
I think it's a more general human phenomena of obedience, not that they even inherently agree with everything they're told, but the disagreement itself is hard, that it's hard to say, I disagree, I won't do what you say, even if it was be as simple as, oh, I'm not going to this rally you're setting up. It'd be hard to say no if somebody asks you, can you come? You either say yes or risk social exclusion. And it's not even a nefarious thing. That's an issue, I think, within science. And we'll probably discuss that next time when we talk about STEM issues these days. But I would say the only political answers you can get now will be from non-political people and scientists, because they're the types of thinkers we need. But unfortunately, I don't think any political oriented people are in a position to do any political thinking. I'm not sure if anybody really is, and that's the deeper problem, I find.
At the root of my view is force. I mean, nature is about force, natural forces, human forces. If you're unwilling to apply force in defense of your ideas, you're not going to win.
I agree.
That's at the base. So there needs to be some new political movement that's willing to apply force. At some point, when the government becomes a dictatorship, you have to revolt. And we need to decide at which point are we going to do that? And
Yeah.
I think it's getting very close to that point.
Well, in a way, that's also reflecting what I'm thinking, how I mentioned that these revolutionary leaders were academics primarily, and they're not just academics who were in the ivory tower and that was it. They literally changed the world. And I think that's almost what you're reflecting here, that it will reach a point like that, and then the systematic thinkers, which are the scientists, which are the people who can build a system, are the ones that really need to be thinking about politics. I mean, there's even a lot to think about, even in terms of what is force and how do you use force in a way to change things. Would it be retaliatory? Would it be self-defense? There's a lot to think about with that. Ultimately, I think it's still, there needs to be some root philosophy, not just philosophically speaking, I want individual rights, but also how you implement it, which is the systematic part we need more to think more about.
And the problem we have as free thinkers is we don't have enough force to apply to the situation. There aren't enough of us. So we either need to join up with the lesser evil or learn how to become a greater force. And that requires propaganda. It requires all kinds of interaction, going out in the streets and meeting people. And we need to engage with people and become groups. We need to form a group and march as a group. And that do exactly what the other sides are doing, but in a rational way.
I do think there is precedent for that, actually. Like, you might sound like, oh, how has this happened except for leftist revolutionaries? I had read a lot about Malcolm X lately, and he had more of a libertarian type political philosophy compared to any other black leftist during the 60s, even especially about like bettering your community, grassroots efforts, working with the community you actually care about, people who actually share your values rather than trying to appeal to the people who hate you, i.e. racists, for example. And he had a lot of revolutionary ideas without being outright violence. It's all about self-defense, but not outright violence like rioting, as we've seen recently. And I mean, that might be sort of thinking what's worth investing time into and understanding, because he brought about change, at least long term, without even that much time. It's like 4 years of speaking and he was murdered. That can change the world, especially. I mean, that seems to be kind of along the lines you're thinking of. Not just complaining about the system, but what are we going to do for ourselves?
Right. I'm saying we need to figure out how to go about it in the right way. Because once we start marching, we have to be doing it the right way. If we're doing it the wrong way, we're gonna mess up. We're gonna attract the wrong people.
Or be a joke at worst.
That'd be a joke, and we could get shot and die, and then there we go. That's it. So we need to do it smart. We need to plan. We need to have our ducks in a row. We need to have our philosophy down pat. We need to have our slogans perfect. So, we need to start forming just social groups online to figure this stuff out, right? And there are a lot of groups online, I realize, and a lot of us belong to them. But we're tearing ourselves apart online, in the objectivist world at least, in the libertarian world and everywhere else. Even within the groups, it's balkanizing. So we need to figure out a way to figure out what our problem is, and like what is driving us apart, and fix it at a fundamental level. And then people need to step up and say, yeah, you're right. I'm gonna join your side, and let's try to convince these other people that they should join us. And there needs to be just networking and forming of groups.
Mm-hmm. I think that is kind of what I think Weinstein had good intentions, trying to think, oh, here's a way to pick candidates differently, but ultimately I don't think that's going to matter much. It's interesting and fun to think about, but it wouldn't go anywhere. I think you're right to talk about more fundamental issues about the individuals who are talking together. Like, why are people so sectarian? Why can't people get along on some common goal? It doesn't even have to be like communistic. It's just, if we have a similar goal, we should work for it. Nothing that weird about it. Pretty rational, pretty egoistic even. I don't think I had much more to say.
It might be enough to just form, like Antifa is a group basically formed to be against fascism.
Yeah, like in the 30s or 40s or something.
Yeah, well, that worked for them. They got a bunch of people who are against fascism. Well, let's have a group that's against Antifa and against fascism. Let's make anti-fascism movement. It's like, or something like that. It doesn't have to be that stupid, but we'll form a group. If we can't agree on what we do believe in positively, then let's form a group based on what we hate, and just say, okay, let's get together based on that, right? And then we'll sort out our differences later. But let's get rid of the socialists. Let's get rid of them first. Let's be anti-socialist, anti all these negative authoritarian movements, anti-racism, anti all this stuff. Let's push those people out, but form a group based on it, and maybe a political group if we can, and just, we are the anti-group. We're anti all these negative things, but we're, obviously I see a problem now, because you got to figure out what you're not against. And then,
yeah, I know. I was about to say that.
yeah. So,
but I do get the sentiment, though.
But maybe that will help us figure out what we're not against. If we can agree on what we're against, then we can just leave the other stuff alone for a while and say, all right, this is what we can tolerate, at least. I don't want to become a tolerationist, but maybe this is what we're not going to attack at the moment.
I'm just imagining now, like, if we did do something radical later, then 2 years from now, someone's going to hear this podcast, like, look at what they originally said way back then. How could they have said this? They're terrible people. That's just what I'm imagining. Just their deep cuts.
Now, that's the other thing, is now you got to worry about cancel culture, because everybody looks up stuff you've said 20 years ago and then cancels you over it. Well, that's about all I have to say. Do you have anything to conclude? Any final remarks?
No, but I find it a very interesting conversation about, like, what we can do, not just about complaining all the time, which is, I think, a good thing to do. And I think it sets a context for next week, when we want to talk about No STEM Day and cancel STEM.
Great. All right. Well, thank you, and I'll talk to you next time.
Yep. And I hope everyone else listening and stays tuned for the next episode. Bye, everyone.
Thank you for watching this episode of Welcome to Reality. Please join us next time for another discussion where we apply philosophical ideas to moral and political action. To support the show, please share our content and consider becoming a sponsor. You'll find a link to our Patreon page in the description of this video.